Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today we're going to be talking about the new Rolo Tomassi album, Where Myth Becomes Memory. I think that's what it's called anyway. I hope I've pronounced that right. Yeah, Where Myth Becomes Memory. Cool. Okay, so I guess first things first. I would like to say that I kind of wish this band were a little bit better known, because I think they're really unique. Honestly, they come from a kind of, I guess, they come from like a mathcore background, but even when they were playing mathcore in a lot of their earliest records, they had a very unique characteristic to the way they kind of played riffs and how they would throw people off. Like, I think in mathcore it's very typical to play something that's very dizzying and very kind of off kilter, off the beaten path, I guess, for heavier genres. But with Rolo Tomassi, I feel like they've always done it quite differently to a lot of other bands. They've always had like a heavy emphasis on synths. They've had lots and lots of clean sections, but still captured a lot of the chaos and a lot of the unwieldiness of those mathcore bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, and the Chariot, stuff like that. So in a way, I kind of wish like this band were bigger, but I also kind of understand why they're not. Their earlier records are definitely less refined, I think, than a lot of bands in the genre, and despite being very unique, I also think they, especially on the earliest records, like the first two, Hysterics and Cosmology, they relied a lot on just the sheer chaos of the sound rather than necessarily anything that was super memorable. So I kind of get it, but interestingly, on the last record, and arguably the one before, maybe even on Astray, I suppose you could argue, but I definitely think most prominently on the previous record, and perhaps Grievances as well, they've kind of changed their sound a little bit. They've gone for more of a approach that's kind of, I guess, how to put it, I don't want to say more mature, because I feel like their sound's always been, I guess, fairly mature. I don't want to make it sound like the early records were unmature. I don't know how to phrase that exactly, but there's more of an emphasis on songwriting. There's more of an emphasis on maybe a bit more cohesion across the whole record as well, which helps it come together as a more, I guess, tight and impactful listen. And the last record actually took a lot of inspiration, I feel like, from post-rock. There were tons of these kind of piano-led grand songs that sort of hit these mountainous climaxes and whatnot. And both those, the previous record and the one before it, were both decent. I don't think Rolo have ever really released like a proper dud of an album, to be honest. But I definitely think that Grievances was where they had kind of the most trouble transitioning from what they used to sound like into this more, I guess, kind of more mature place. But the previous album, the one before it, the one before this one, I think it's called Time Will Die and Love Will Bury It, something like that. I can't remember the entire title for sure. But that record definitely came a lot closer to, I think, what they were trying to do on Grievances, at least to my ears. So I was definitely really excited to see what they come up with next, because I really enjoyed the previous record and the direction they were taking, but I felt like there was still some work to be done in terms of making it feel more cohesive and flow more naturally, because the last record had a lot of great songs on it, but it definitely felt like a lot of great songs rather than necessarily an album that completely came together, at least for me. And again, that's not a knock on it. The record is still kind of fucking awesome, and you should definitely go back and check it out. But all of that context brings us to the new album, and essentially, I would say everything I wanted them to do on the last record has been done here, at least on a first listen. It's a much more cohesive project that feels like most of the songs flow into each other in an incredibly natural way. There's still a good amount of variety here. In fact, I would actually say the first half of the record, the first 5 songs, all have a pretty unique vibe. And the back half definitely does still sound quite varied. There's some really big highlights on the back end of the record, but it still, I guess, like, that's when you kind of get what they're doing, I suppose, a bit more, so it may feel a little less varied, but overall, still a good amount of variety across this whole record, while still feeling, just very cohesive and having a great flow. So I guess I should just get into the individual songs, because honestly, on a first listen, this was such a wash of emotions that hit me in a lot of different ways, just like I would expect from a Rolo Tomassi project, but it really did feel like one cohesive vision, which I can really, really appreciate. The whole thing opens with this kind of like, I guess, more of a melodic and kind of more climactic post-rock rocky, I guess, type of intro. To begin with, it's very melodic, and it hits you with a really melodic, but also kind of like noisy and very maxed out wall of noise. And it almost reminds me a little bit of something that My Bloody Valentine would pull off, just in how maxed out the whole song is. But then it breaks into this piano part that's kind of very traditional for the band, and the vocals carry the whole song. It's a decent opener. It shows what they're going for more so on this record. For sure, it's a really good mission statement. It's, a longer song. It's got more ambitious sound play on it, and it sets the tone quite nicely. Then, one of the biggest issues I have with this record is probably the second song, Cloaked. So we're going to get most of our criticisms out the way, I suppose, right now. So Cloaked to me feels like something a gent band would pull off almost, and overall I don't think it's like terrible or anything like that, even though that style and sound really isn't for me. It's not as squeaky clean as a ton of gent, and Eva's harsh vocals do a ton to help the song out in feeling slightly more distinct, because her vocals are just ridiculously unique. Like, her harsh vocals are unbelievably harsh and incredibly distinct, and her cleans also complement the band's kind of mood when they go for those like cleaner sections or more climactic sections. So even though I don't think her cleans are like, absolutely mind-blowing or anything, they fit the band incredibly well, so I wouldn't really have it any other way. She does a great job of that on this song, and it helps the song stand out even though I'm not as into what's going on here musically. It just feels, I guess, overall a little too close to a lot of what tech metal is doing, and doesn't do enough to, I guess, define itself away from that. Having said that, though, if you're into those kind of sounds, and I know a lot of people are, then this song, I'm sure, will be completely fine. It's quite washed out and dreamy at times, which, again, helps make it feel a bit more distinct. But like I said, overall, what I love about Rolo Tomassi doesn't really appear on this track. Fortunately, though, basically the next song and the rest of the record absolutely delivers, and that Mutual Ruin is probably one of the best songs they've ever strung together, and it absolutely feels like one of those songs that only Rolo Tomassi could pull off. It's such a chaotic and multifaceted song with so many different levels of kind of heaviness and harshness and off-kilterness and cleanness. There's just so much going on this song that it's almost hard to describe. It opens with these kind of stabbing pianos, and the drums kind of groove over the top of them, and then loads and loads of kind of different elements come in slowly over time to really elevate it. And they build on that one section so well that I was incredibly engaged during that. And then they broke into a very classic sounding kind of Rolo Tomassi mathcore section. I love the quote unquote hook as well when it gets into the more melodic set part of the track as well. It's all of it just sounds so distinctly Rolo Tomassi. And overall, there's just so much going on in this song that represents Rolo at their absolute best. Like, the clean sections sound awesome, the heavy sections sound awesome, it all comes together, it all reinforces itself great. And there's also, there's one breakdown at the halfway point that just made me pull the most hilarious face in the best way possible. It's a great song. It really, it just represents everything this band do at their absolute best. The next song, Labyrinth, is another really, really heavy song. It's more mid-paced, though, this time around. It's got kind of a more, I guess, groovy guitar riff that, again, is still off-kilter in a way that only Rolo Tomassi can do. That's actually something I want to draw attention to. A lot of the riffs that Rolo Tomassi have always written don't really sound like many other bands. They've got a fun, playful energy to them while still sounding a lot of the times really heavy and really dizzying. And I don't think there's many bands, if any, really, that can pull it off, certainly in the way they do. And this song, again, kind of reflects that. There's a really kind of noisy and punchy bass and drum groove to open it. Then it breaks into just the mid-pace crushing guitar rhythm. And it's also beautifully off-kilter that I just got absolutely sucked in. The melodic part towards the kind of middle and end of the track reminded me a lot of Deftones, but filtered through that Rolo lens. So yeah, big fan of this track. It was good. I do wish the structure was maybe a tiny bit more ambitious, but it's a shorter song, so it doesn't bother me too much. Then after this, we get one of the, something that Rolo do a decent amount, where they mix in these kind of softer songs into the records just to break up the heaviness. And Closer is definitely a soft song. It brings a lot of clean vocals, piano, and a kind of a post-rock structure with a big climactic ending. But I gotta say, on this individual track, I do feel a little bit more lukewarm. I don't know, it feels a little bit... The end result, I guess, just feels a little bit too familiar to a lot of other post-rock stuff that's about. But yeah, this doesn't... it's not like a huge issue. It breaks up the record as well in the heavier parts really nicely. So I understand why it's here structurally, even if I'm not crazy about the song. The next song, Drip, is another one of these very chaotic, harsh kind of songs, but it has a almost more metalcore vibe to it, with a lot of the kind of like quickly chugged guitar rhythms. They sound very almost like traditionally metalcore, I guess. They remind me a lot of bands, almost like oh god, I'm trying to think of like a really good comparison point, because it wouldn't quite be someone like... God, it would almost be maybe some more deathcore bands, I guess. I'm struggling to think of any specific example. I almost want to say it reminds me a tiny bit of like something that maybe Dead Guy would pull off, but I don't think that's quite right. But whatever. Anyway, the point is more of a metalcore sounding song, but it's filtered through that like Rolo kind of sound. I really appreciate all of the extra sounds that come in to add like an extra level of harshness. The middle of the song is this long melodic passage with like a drum roll that builds with a variety of different elements, and then the closing to the song is a combination of the melodic and the more metalcore harsh parts that comes together really well. And then I'll say after this point, the only thing I'll say is that you get a decent chunk of songs. So I would include Drip in this as well. Like basically after Closer, most of the songs fall into this kind of like, into this heavy, chaotic kind of zone. And I do feel like maybe some of the songs could have been a bit more distinct, but honestly, all of the songs go off really without a hitch. You've got Pre-Science and To Resist Forgetting that are both, just very off-kilter, mathcore-y, heavy whirlwinds of insanity and chaos. To Resist Forgetting specifically is particularly chaotic. The drums just go absolutely ham on the first minute of the song. And again, I would say this is a song that definitely represents Rolo at their best. It's got a mishmash of different heavy and clean parts overlaid and complementing each other. It's very dizzying, but they keep a lot of viscerality to what they're doing. It feels incredibly multifaceted. There's lots of different parts, but none of it ever feels unnatural. It's all very cohesive. And I'll say that even though, like I said, this back end of the record does feel like there's a couple of the heavy songs that maybe feel like they overlap a little bit. This is on a first listen, so I wouldn't be surprised if another 5 listens down the line, everything feels way more distinct. And B, none of these are bad. Everything is incredibly tightly performed. Everything feels very, very punchy, well produced. And like I said, they mix in a lot of those more ambitious song structure ideas that makes it all feel still very cohesive and, again, slightly more mature, slightly more, I guess, captivating to some extent, slightly more atmospheric as well. And then the only 2 songs that I really want to talk about that kind of help break this up a little bit, help it from, feeling so overwhelming, is you have Stumbling, which is another softer song, but I much prefer this one to Closer. I actually feel like it has a much more unique personality to it. Everything's slightly washed out and feels very organic and live. I really love the atmosphere it creates. Eva's vocal performance is kind of ghostly and really complements what's happening with the piano. It all feels, just quite unique. There's a subtle darkness to it as well that I really appreciated. And then the other song would be The End of Eternity, which is essentially the next in a long line of really grand, really post-rock influenced closers that Rolo have done at the end of every single album, more or less. Or at least from what I can remember. This is basically the second longest song on the record. I don't really know how to describe it outside of saying that it feels a lot more appropriate for this newer sound. It's still very post-rock kind of influenced in a similar way to the way Closer is, but I much prefer this song. There's more ideas going on, and I would say overall it's a great Closer. I feel like all of the individual sounds come together better on this song than they do on Closer as well. And one thing I will say as well is on the kind of end cuts of any Rolo album, you'll always get an amount of harshness, because I feel like they try to capture a lot of what the record was doing and encompass it into one song, which here feels, like I said, a lot more appropriate than on some of their previous albums. Because on the previous albums, you'll get like a really crazy mathcore song that lasts about a minute and has has like a synth solo that more or less sounds like someone just threw a keyboard down a set of stairs, which, is really cool and incredibly dizzying. But it doesn't fit in with a lot of the other more ambitious things they were trying to do before. So these endings always felt a little bit not bad. The songs were for the most part great. The one at the end of Astria, Illuminaire, I think it's called, is an incredible song, but it just feels a lot more appropriate here, where you have all these different layers of everything they've built on over the past 6 albums. When it all comes together this well across an entire project, a closing like this feels a lot more earned. And I think that's how I would describe this record in comparison to a lot of Rolo Tomassi's other stuff. In general, everything on this record feels like something you could have only made at this point in being a band. And the other thing as well is that, everything just feels more earned, because you know exactly where they're coming from. All of the context that led them up to this record makes so much sense when you listen to this record, and it's such a glorious payoff, I think, is what I'm trying to say overall. I don't know what else to say. This is just honestly a pretty fantastic record. I am definitely going to be listening to it a ton more over the course of this year. I'm loving what's happening here, honestly. I mean, it's way too early to say, but right now I'm kind of thinking this might be like, I don't know, maybe my favourite or second favourite Rolo album, even if I do have a few minor gripes here and there. I'm just loving what's happening on this record. They've done a great job of capturing the harshness of the sound, the melody of the sound. It comes together so cohesively. It is an incredible record. Everyone should go check it out if you're into harsher, more chaotic music, for sure. But also, even if you're into, I don't know, maybe some of the more post-rocky stuff, or even some of the alt-rocky stuff, like I mentioned Deftones earlier. If you're into that kind of thing and you think you could handle something a little more chaotic, a little more heavy, I feel like there's a lot of common ground, a lot here that you'll enjoy. I think that's pretty much everything I have to say about this Rolo album. This is by far the longest episode I've done. I'm not too surprised though, because this band are really cool and deserve a lot more attention, and I think this is a record that definitely could do it for them, but I suppose we'll see. Either way, I'm just rambling now. I hope you've enjoyed this this podcast, and I'll hopefully see you all around. Peace out, everybody.